What's up, you guys? What's really good? Welcome back to my Stacy Detox channel, where we talk about mental health, self-love, and how to continue to better ourselves. Today we're going to be talking about my experience with therapy, and you guys, I'm very excited because even though I'm such a huge advocate for mental health, for therapy, and for seeking the most understanding within yourself, I don't think I've ever actually had a video where I sit down and I talk all about my therapy journey, what I've done, how I started, the experiences that I've had with it. And so I figured that it would be a good experience for me to share it. And just in case you're thinking about going to therapy, or just in case anything negative has happened to you while in therapy, maybe you can feel like you have somebody to relate to. There has never been another time where mental health has been more talked about than now. My point with this video is to encourage some of you to seek therapy so that you can seek yourself, to normalize the conversation happening around therapy, especially in the Latin community. As you guys know, a lot of times we as Latinos, we grow in a culture where we're told like there's no time for that, there's no money for that, eso es para locos, o sea, jamás vas a poder contarle a otras personas nuestras cosas personales. If you say what happened to you when you were little, like you're gonna diminish the family name and things like that. So it's my hope that by me talking about therapy and my journey with it, you can either show your parents this video and be like, look, there is a Latina woman that went to therapy and look, she's fine, no está loca. O sea, está bien, no le falta ni un tornillo, you know? And more than anything, I would like to share my story. My testimony is not a how-to guide on how to go to therapy, but hopefully by me sharing this piece of myself and by me giving you guys these words, you can feel the courage to ask for help, because it's not always the easiest to go out there and to tell somebody else what happened to you, whether it was when you were little or if something recently happened to you or you're currently going through something. I understand how hard it is to open up to somebody, especially a stranger, and I truly want to make you feel like you're not alone in that. First of all, I want to start by sharing my experience with therapy. As you guys know, I grew up in Mexico from ages like 1 until I was 13. So thankfully, my mom has always been very open-minded when it came to mental health, not necessarily for herself. I don't think my mom has ever been to therapy herself, but when I was little, surprisingly, she took me to therapy. I have no idea why. I know why, but like, I don't know what inspired her to be like, okay, this kid needs therapy, if she herself had never been to it, but I'm grateful that she did. So my first time in therapy was actually between the ages of 7 to 9. I don't actually remember how old I was, but I do remember I was in elementary school. So from what I remember back then, because it's not very clear to me, I used to actually watch my mom sleep when I was little. So in Mexico, it's very common that you go to your work day from the morning, like 9 to 12, then you come home from 12 to 3, and then you go back to work from 3 to 6. So they kind of have like a split shift, right? So at least where I'm from. And so that was my parents' schedule. So they would pick us up from school at 12, we would all go home, eat together, and then my parents would take a nap, and then they would go back to work. Or my dad would go back to work. So whenever I would come home from school, they would pick me up, we would eat together, and my parents would go to sleep. I would watch my mom sleep to make sure that she was breathing. So I vividly remember her laying there and me like constantly watching her to make sure that her chest was going up and down. There was several times where my mom woke up and she was like, oh, what is happening? Like, I can only imagine. And I can't really tell you why, you guys. Like, all I know is that even when I was that young, I felt like, oh my God, like I need to make sure this woman is breathing, because if at any point she stops breathing, I need to call somebody to make sure that she makes it to the hospital and she lives. You guys, I have no idea why I felt that way. I have absolutely no idea where I even learned it from, probably novelas, but every single day I would do that. I don't know, and maybe I can ask my mom like what inspired her to take me to therapy, but that was enough for her to be like, all right, like this is above me, I don't really know what to do, like I need to take her to talk to somebody. So my first experience with therapy, it was a girl, it was the therapist, I don't remember her name, I don't even remember what she looked like, but she would make me draw like, oh, okay, draw your family and draw your little house, and like I would draw everything, and then she would interpret it and like tell my parents about it, I'm sure. So I don't really remember how that ended, but that was my first experience with it. As you guys know, well, if you don't know, I've talked about it numerous times online, but briefly, my parents went through a divorce when I was 11 to 13, and then at 13, my mom brought us to the US, which a divorce is already a huge traumatic experience, as you guys know. But then when we moved here, we moved with literally no money at all. So I went from living my normal childhood life to suffering a big traumatic experience that was my parents' divorce, till then going into full-on survival mode because we didn't even know where our food was going to come from, where we were going to get clothes from, or anything of that sort. So when I was 13 and we moved here, the last thing my mom was thinking was therapy, even though we had gone through something traumatic. And even though not having food and growing up in poverty is a very traumatic experience, and it's something that can cause lifelong problems for people, we didn't have the resources to seek therapy at that point. So my next time actually going to therapy wouldn't be until I was 21 years old. So skipping from 13 all the way to 21, at this point in my life, I had just stopped playing college volleyball, and I was actually living in an apartment with an ex-teammate of mine. I was living in an apartment that was really expensive to upkeep, and this was like my first time living in the outside world as an adult. I had a full-time job where I was a manager at a gym, and this was a point in my life, you guys, where I excluded myself from my family life, and I was living in an apartment basically by myself because my roommate would always be at her boyfriend's house, and I was suffering from binge eating. And I was also in a depressive state. I never got diagnosed with depression, but looking back now, I can tell that I was going through a mental health crisis, and I didn't really know how to reach out to somebody, and I didn't really know what I needed to do in order to get out of it. At that point, I had a friend who was actually, you know, kind enough to tell me like, hey, I've been going to therapy and it's done wonders for me. You should also do the same thing. It's gonna change your life. And at this point, like, you guys, I was barely getting enough money to pay my bills. I was like, girl, how could I ever go to therapy? Like, therapy is something that is so expensive. It's not for people like me. It's hundreds of dollars, because she was very well off. So she was paying like $250 a session. And so she told me, she was like, you know, just look. So at that point, kind of to like summarize it very small, I actually ended up quitting that really toxic job and asking my mom if I can moving back home and getting like a quick part-time job. And my first experience reaching out to a therapist myself was I actually looked for therapists around the area. And I called the therapist, the first name I saw, and I just asked like, hey, I don't really have, like, I'm interested in therapy, but I'm 19 or I'm 21 years old. I don't really have a lot of money. And so what a lot of therapists will do is this thing called like a sliding scale, in which they'll ask you how much can you comfortably pay. And so at that time, he asked me like, well, how much can you comfortably pay? And I said $50. And he said, okay, I can see you once every 2 weeks, just so that you can at least get into therapy. I don't know if every single therapist does that, but I do think it's a wonderful tool to just call and ask like, hey, I really need help and I don't really have a lot of resources. Is there anywhere that you can point me to? Or do you personally do a sliding scale pay? Or is there any way that we can work something out so that I can at least get in to see somebody? Things didn't really work out with that therapist. It just wasn't a good match for me, and I kind of stopped going to therapy. But that started my need and my drive for wanting to get to know myself better. So I started reading a lot of self-help books. I started watching a lot of TED Talks. I started researching into a lot of different therapists that had different theories and different things on how to understand myself better. Of course, that's not a substitute for therapy, but if you are not in a position where you can actually afford therapy, a great thing that you can do meanwhile that you get in a position to where you can afford it is read books, journal. There's a ton of free videos on YouTube and things that you can look up, articles, things that can help you understand you and your situation meanwhile that you get back up on your feet. When I stopped going to therapy at 21, I was just living my life, going through it, you know, just living my everyday. And I actually didn't get back into therapy until I was 26 years old. So at this time, from 21 to 26, I was living my life, I was dating, I was getting to know myself, I was going through the normal things that a 20-something-year-old does, trying to figure my life out. And then I actually had an instance where I went through a really big heartbreak. So as you guys know, I'm a huge advocate for therapy, and this therapist is the one that changed things for me. At this point, I had been on and off with somebody for 3 years, and something really, really big happened to where I was broken, you guys, and I didn't know who to ask for help. I had gone to therapy when I was 21, and so the only thing that I had left when I truly didn't know who to turn to was a therapist. So I did the same thing that I did when I was 21, because at this point I still didn't have insurance. I didn't have the money to just like walk in somewhere and get help. So I looked up therapists around my area, and the thing that caught my attention about this therapist, I don't know, something just like called me to it. So I called and I was like, hey, I'm interested in therapy. You know, how much do you guys charge? And I remember they were like, hey, it's $150 for your first session. And I could afford that, but I knew that it wasn't going to be something that I could sustain weekly. So I said, I'll just go to the first session just so that I can get some guidance on what to do on this heartbreak. And then once after that, like I can at least do the research on my own. Like I just need to talk to somebody so they can tell me I'm not crazy, so they can tell me I'm on the right track, so they can tell me I'm doing the right thing, and then I'll continue to do my own thing. Booked that session, and the first time that I walked in and I met my therapist, you guys, my life changed. And I don't mean that because, oh my God, like she just was the greatest thing, but this was the first time where I actually saw a therapist who was a woman. She was probably about 8 to 10 years older than me, and she was Hispanic. So the fact that there was another Latina woman who had been through something similar than me, who understood my language, who understood my culture, who was kind of around my same age range. I truly didn't know why at the time, but now I can look back and see I felt like I can relate to her, as opposed to the therapist I had when I was 21, right? Who was like an older white man who I didn't feel like I had anything in common with. When I met this therapist when I was 26, that I saw a woman 10 years older than me, Hispanic, who could understand me, I felt seen. I saw her actually for the next like 2.5 years on and off, and we were able to work out a deal where she would be like, oh, if you buy these many sessions together, I can give you this kind of discount. So I wouldn't really go weekly, but I would buy a bunch of sessions from her. I would use them, I would take some time off, and then I would do the same thing where like whenever I had extra money, I would buy a bunch of sessions again. So that's kind of how I was seeing her. What started off as going for heartbreak with this certain therapist, I actually ended up dealing with that and then getting into other childhood traumas, teenage traumas, and adulthood traumas, and working on detangling all the stress and all the stuff that I had ever gone through. Of course, with therapy, it's not like you ever like fix everything and you're like, okay, I'm perfect, like that's it, nothing's ever gonna happen. But once I was able to go to therapy just because I wanted to become a better person, kind of do maintenance rather than like chaos is happening in my life, I truly started to see therapy as a living tool rather than something that you go to just because your life is falling apart. As you guys know, recently, or if you don't know, recently I actually got insurance last year, and I actually started going to another therapist through my insurance. So throughout my life, I have probably seen around 4 different therapists. I actually did see somebody in college too, but I kind of forgot about that. But with all these experiences that I've had, I think that I can share a little bit of what's made me feel comfortable and what has worked for me when finding a therapist that maybe you guys can use for yourself. It's not a how-to guide or a perfect experience that might work for everybody, but I figure if I share my experience and you could take in what's useful for you, and then when you're looking for a therapist around your area or when you're looking for your own journey, you can avoid the mistakes that I made. So going about finding your perfect match can be a little bit overwhelming, especially if you've never been to therapy before, because how do you know what you're looking for? How do you know what questions to ask? How do you know what you're supposed to be feeling? Aren't they the professionals? Shouldn't they know how to fit everybody? You guys, therapists are people, and unfortunately people are imperfect, even if they've been through years and years of practice and of school. So some of the things that I wrote down that I think may be beneficial, that I feel have helped me are these. First one for me is being able to identify with my therapist. Like I told you guys earlier, when I met my second therapist, I absolutely adore her. I saw somebody who was Latina like me, who she's actually tall as well, so I felt connected by that. I'm tall if you didn't know. She was within my age group. She spoke Spanish, so as you guys know, I speak a lot of Spanglish. So when there's things that I would say that were in Spanish and she just she caught on and she answered me in Spanish, like I just felt like we had really good chemistry. And when I compare that to that first therapist that I had when I was 21, that was like an older white male that I had nothing in common with, I can tell you this: find someone that you can connect with. There's hundreds of different therapists that are of color, that are part of the LGBT community, that are part of these like smaller communities that can make you feel at home, especially when you're talking about certain issues. Just find what fits right for you, and you can be with a certain therapist for a certain amount of time, and then eventually if another issue pops up for you in your life and you need somebody that specializes in that, you can always switch therapists. Another thing that's really important to me when I have my therapist is being respected and acknowledged as a client. Maybe it turns out that that therapist I had when I was 21 was really disrespectful, because it's coming up a lot, so obviously it's really important to me. So when you're sharing your life, when you're sharing your experiences, when you're sharing your worries with your therapist, they should not disrespect you or make you feel judged. So for example, if you say something like, like, I don't know, you guys, what's like a weird thing? Let's say, for example, you're in therapy and you're saying like, oh my God, every time I take my dog on a walk and I pick up the dog's poop, I like smell it, you know? That's like the randomest thing I could think of. You know, when you're telling your therapist that, your therapist should never be like, oh my God, how disgusting, how dare you, like, why would you ever do that? Absolutely not. Your therapist should just sit there and say, why do you think you're doing that? Or, you know, like, what makes you feel like you need to do that? Or whatever other question that you need in order to get you closer to the root of the issue. If you're feeling like you're telling your therapist, hey, you know, like my boyfriend cheated on me, but I actually want to stay with him, and the therapist is telling you things like, don't be dumb, like you shouldn't be with him, that's not a good therapist, you guys. And it's okay for you to remember that therapists are only people and they're not always going to be perfect. So if you're feeling judged, if you're feeling like you can't be yourself, if you're feeling like you can't fully open up about whatever issue that initially took you to therapy, it may be a good idea for you to reconsider somebody else. Another thing that's really important for me when being with a therapist, it is for me to be challenged. So it is one thing to be judged and another thing to be challenged. I've been through enough therapy and enough therapists to know that there are different kinds of specialties, and so there are therapists out there that like to just listen and give you feedback, and then that's good enough for them. And there are other therapists that'll be like, I'm gonna leave you homework, I want you to write in your journal, you know, like this is like a simple one, like 3 things you're grateful for a week, and see how you feel after that. Or I'm gonna give you homework, I want you to go like write your ex-boyfriend a letter and then burn it off in the wind. Or, you know, for me at least, I'm a very interactive person when it comes to therapy, and so I like to be given homework and I like to do the extra work. And maybe for you that may not be the thing, but recognizing that about yourself and seeing like, hey, I would actually like to do the extra work after therapy, that's something that you can communicate to your therapist. And if they say, you know, like it's not really my thing, that's okay, you can find somebody else. And if they say, you know, it's okay for you to ask your therapist. At the end of the day, you guys, whether you have insurance or you're paying out of pocket, you are hiring them to do a service, and that service is to help you heal who you are on the inside. Last but not least, one of the main things that helps me know if I'm with a good therapist or not is when I feel understood. I don't always feel like I'm 100% fixed every time I leave therapy. Sometimes I leave feeling overwhelmed. Sometimes I leave feeling sad. Sometimes I leave feeling like my feelings were shook, you know, but at the end, I always feel like I'm progressing. The one thing that it always comes down to is that at the end of it all, when everything settles back down, I always feel understood and like I'm making progress. If you are not feeling that way, if you're not feeling like things are getting better, or like there's different things that you can work on, or like you at least have someone that can listen to you and that you feel understood by, it might be a good idea to reconsider finding someone else as a therapist. Like I said at the beginning of this video, this is not a how-to guide on therapy finding, but I think there's some good tips and tricks, or you know, like some good categories that may help you get closer to finding the right fit for you. I know that what may work for me might not exactly work for you, but at the end of the day, you guys, if we all continue to share our experiences, and if we all continue to help each other, and we continue to put these videos out there, and we continue to help each other down in the comments, then we may have a closer understanding of what it's like to feel understood and seen by a mental health professional. I still stand by what I say when I say that therapy has changed my life completely, and I wouldn't be who I am without it. So if you are struggling with your mental health and you feel like you have nobody to talk to, or you feel like you want a deeper understanding of yourself, I highly suggest that you seek help, professional help, and I highly suggest that you give yourself that opportunity that you deserve. I'm so sorry if a therapist has ever been rude to you, or if you have ever felt like you weren't worthy enough to understand yourself better. I can promise you you're worthy, and I can promise you that you deserve the love, understanding, and patience that you so willingly give to other people. I pray and hope that all of you find the right fit for you. And if any of you guys who have been to therapy, or if you're a therapist yourself, would like to share down below how you found a good therapist, or how you go about finding the perfect match for you, like what are things that you look for in the people that you go to therapy with, please let us know down below. We would love to read you. We would love to know how you learn or what you look for. And if you're seeking for therapy, read the comments down below. And I just want to congratulate you for continuing to pursue a higher understanding of yourself. I know it's not easy, but I appreciate that you're doing that in order to become a better person. That's gonna be it for me, you guys. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please consider leaving it a thumbs up, because it really helps me out in the algorithm. And if you haven't yet, please consider subscribing. We are a growing family, and I am so grateful to have all of you here. Que Dios me las bendiga. Quiérete mucho, respétate más, and I'll see you in the next video.